The 80s was a wild time. Big hair, neon lights, and music that still echoes through speakers today. It was a decade of bold experimentation, cultural shifts, and legendary artists who defined a generation. But behind the glam and the guitars, there's a darker side to some of these stories. Fates that ended not just tragically, but in ways so strange they sound like urban legends. These aren't just tales of rock star excess or typical tragedies. We're talking about stories that veer into the downright bizarre, with details that leave fans stunned even decades later. What happened to these musicians feels almost too surreal to be true. Accidents that defy explanations, decisions that raise eyebrows, and endings that seem more like scenes from a movie than real life. From chart-topping icons to cult favorites, these are the musicians whose chapter took unexpected, eerie turns. Buckle up, because the stories ahead are just as unforgettable as the music they left behind. Amos Milbour. Amos Milbour was a rhythm and blues pioneer whose influence stretched far beyond the 1940s and 50s, helping lay the groundwork for rock and roll with his boogie-woogie piano style and smooth, soulful voice. Known for hits like One Scotch, One Bourbon, One Beer, and Chicken Shack Boogie, Milbour's music captured the gritty joy of nightlife in post-war America. But despite his early fame and undeniable talent, his later years were marked by misfortune, and his death in 1980 remains a quietly tragic and bizarrely overlooked chapter in music history. By the 1960s, Milbour's career had declined, overshadowed by a new wave of artists who built on the very style he helped create. Struggling with alcoholism, a theme eerily echoed in many of his songs, his health began to spiral. In the late 70s, he suffered a debilitating stroke that left him partially paralyzed and unable to play the piano, silencing the very instrument that had defined his identity. What makes his death in 1980 particularly haunting isn't just the sad irony of a man known for songs about drinking ultimately being undone by complications stemming from a stroke, worsened by years of alcohol abuse. It's the way his passing slipped through the cracks. Milbour died on January 3rd in Houston, largely unnoticed by the public and music press. There were no big headlines, no sweeping tributes, just a quiet end for a man whose sound once lit up juke joints and inspired generations. Even today, his death feels like a cruel twist of fate. Here was a musical architect whose innovations helped birth an entire genre, dying in near obscurity, his legacy dimmed by time and tragedy. It's a reminder that fame can be fleeting and that even legends can fade away without the send-off they truly deserve. Larry Williams. Larry Williams was a rock and roll powerhouse, a multi-talented singer, songwriter, and pianist who burst onto the scene in the late 1950s with hits like Boney Maroney, Dizzy, Miss Lizzie, and Short Fat Fanny. His raw energy and infectious hooks made him a standout figure in early rock, and his influence echoed far beyond his own recordings. The Beatles covered his songs, and Little Richard counted him as a close collaborator and friend. But behind the hits and high-energy performances was a life marked by instability, criminal entanglements, and ultimately, a dark and tragic end. On January 7, 1980, Larry Williams was found dead in his Los Angeles home from a gunshot wound to the head. The death was ruled a suicide, but the circumstances surrounding it have long been shrouded in speculation and mystery. By that time, Williams had become deeply entangled in a world far removed from the bright lights of the stage. He had been arrested multiple times on charges related to drugs and weapons and was rumored to be involved in more serious criminal activity. Friends said he had grown increasingly paranoid and erratic in the years leading up to his death. What makes his passing particularly bizarre is the contrast between his vibrant legacy and the silence that followed his death. There was no major media storm, no public mourning. For a man whose music helped shape rock history, his end was disturbingly quiet, almost as if the world had moved on without noticing. Whether it was truly suicide or something more sinister, the tragedy remains. Larry Williams was just 44 years old, still young, still talented, and still capable of brilliance. His life and death serve as a sobering reminder of how quickly fame can fade, and how even those who help define a genre can be lost in the shadows. Carl White, the powerful lead voice behind the doo-wop group The Rivingtons, was one of those rare vocalists who could make a song jump right off the record. Best known for the 1962 novelty hit Papa Mau Mau, followed by The Bird's the Word, White and the Rivingtons injected a playful, infectious energy into the early 60s R&B scene. Their sound would go on to influence countless acts, even inspiring the surf rock hit Surfin' Bird by the Trashmen, which famously mashed up both Rivingtons' tracks into a single, chaotic anthem. But behind the fun and frolic of his recordings, Carl White's life came to a tragic and oddly unsettling end. On January 7, 1980, in Los Angeles, he died at just 47 years old from complications related to acute tonsillitis, a cause of death that, for an adult in the modern medical era, feels almost unbelievable. It's a condition typically seen as minor and treatable, rarely fatal with proper care. Yet for White, it proved deadly, sparking questions about whether underlying health issues, neglect, or misdiagnosis played a role. What makes his death bizarre isn't just the cause, but how quietly it happened. By 1980, the Rivingtons had faded from the spotlight, their influence mostly remembered by die-hard fans and crate diggers. There were no major headlines, no national tributes, just a quiet passing of a man whose voice helped define a slice of pop culture that would echo in everything from punk to TV commercials. Carl White's death is one of those tragic music world mysteries. A vibrant talent taken too soon by a seemingly minor illness. His loss marked more by silence than recognition. It stands as a sobering reminder of how even the most joyful voices in music can be silenced suddenly, and how easily the industry can forget the pioneers who shaped its sound. Professor Longair. Professor Longair, born Henry Rowland Bird, was more than just a musician. He was the heartbeat of New Orleans rhythm and blues. With his unique, rollicking piano style that fused rumba, boogie-woogie blues, and Caribbean rhythms, he laid the foundation for the Crescent City's signature sound. Tracks like Tipatina, Big Chief, and Go to the Mardi Gras weren't just songs. They were anthems of a culture, played from French Quarter clubs to second-line parades. Yet for all his musical brilliance and influence on artists like Dr. John, Fats Domino, and the Meters, his life ended in a way that feels both tragic and quietly bizarre. On January 23, 1980, just days before he was scheduled to perform at a prestigious show during the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival, Professor Longair died of a heart attack in his home. He was only 61. His death was sudden, and for many fans, completely unexpected, especially considering that his career had just begun to enjoy a long-overdue resurgence. After decades of struggling with poverty and obscurity, he was finally receiving the recognition he deserved, making his passing feel cruelly mistimed. Adding to the tragedy, Longair died alone in his home, in the very city that he helped musically define. The man whose music brought life to so many New Orleans streets passed away in quiet, stark contrast to the joyful noise he spent his life creating. There was no grand farewell, no nationwide tribute, just the stillness after a storm of sound. What makes his death bizarre isn't some mystery or scandal, but the jarring irony. Just as the world began to truly embrace the genius of Professor Longair, he was gone. A foundational figure, silenced before he could fully enjoy the legacy he'd built from the ground up. Bon Scott. Bon Scott, the original frontman of AC/DC, was a force of nature, wild, unpredictable, and electrifying on stage. With his gritty voice, devil-may-care attitude, and raw charisma, he helped catapult AC/DC from an up-and-coming Australian rock band to an international powerhouse. Songs like High Voltage, Highway to Hell, and Let There Be Rock weren't just hits. They were anthems that defined a generation of hard rock. But behind the swagger and iconic sound was a man who lived life on the edge, and whose untimely death remains one of rock's most bizarre and tragic stories. On February 19, 1980, at just 33 years old, Bon Scott was found dead in a car in Dulwich, London. The official cause was alcohol poisoning. He had choked on his own vomit after a heavy night of drinking. There were also whispers of a possible heroin overdose, though that was never confirmed. The circumstances were haunting. A man with one of the most powerful voices in rock, reduced to silence in the passenger seat of a parked car, alone and exposed to the freezing cold. What makes his death particularly strange is the timing. AC/DC was on the brink of exploding into superstardom. The Highway to Hell album had just brought them to global attention, and the band was preparing to record what would become their biggest success, Back in Black. The tragic irony, that album, which would go on to define their legacy, became a tribute to the very man who never got to sing a note of it. Bon Scott's death wasn't just a loss for AC/DC, it was a gut punch to rock and roll itself. A symbol of excess taken too soon in a way that felt both painfully avoidable and eerily fitting for someone who lived life at full volume. Jacob Miller. Jacob Miller, the charismatic frontman of the influential reggae band Inner Circle, was a rising star whose voice and energy brought a fresh vibrance to the genre. Known for his rich, soulful delivery and magnetic stage presence, Miller helped redefine reggae with hits like Tenement Yard and Piece of My Heart. His music was deeply connected to the rhythms and spirit of Jamaica, blending roots reggae with a pop accessibility that made him a household name across the globe. But just as his career was hitting new heights, his life was tragically cut short in a bizarre and devastating way. On March 23, 1980, at the tender age of 27, Jacob Miller died in a car accident in Kingston, Jamaica. He was traveling with friends when their vehicle crashed, killing him instantly. The accident was shocking not just because of his age, but also because of how suddenly it happened. Miller had so much left to offer, both musically and personally. Just days before his death, he had been recording new material, and his band's momentum was at an all-time high. His loss left a void in the reggae world that would never truly be filled. What makes Miller's death all the more tragic is the quiet way it unfolded. While his music had inspired so many, his passing barely made a blip in the international news, especially outside of reggae circles. His sudden, violent death felt oddly out of sync with his peaceful music and message. The irony of such a vibrant life extinguished so abruptly in an accident seemed surreal, almost as if fate had conspired to cut short a musical revolution. Jacob Miller's death was a loss not just to reggae but to the world of music at large, a gifted, joyful soul taken too soon, leaving fans to wonder what more he could have achieved if his life hadn't been so tragically interrupted. Ricky Lancelotti. Ricky Lancelotti was a promising figure in the world of rock music, known for his powerful voice and electric stage presence. A member of the band, The Imports, Lancelotti's raw energy and distinctive sound caught the attention of music fans in the late 70s and early 80s. His music had a punk-infused edge, blending gritty rock with the rebellious spirit of the era. Although The Imports didn't reach widespread commercial success, Lancelotti's talent was undeniable, and he had the potential to make a lasting impact in the rock scene. However, Ricky Lancelotti's life was tragically cut short in an unexpected and bizarre manner. On April 7, 1980, at the age of 35, he was found dead from a combination of a drug overdose and a traffic accident. Lancelotti had reportedly been under the influence when his car crashed, leading to his death. The circumstances surrounding his passing left many questions unanswered. Was it a reckless accident? Did his struggles with substance abuse play a larger role? What's particularly haunting is how quietly his death unfolded. There were no major headlines or tributes to honor his passing. The music world moved on without a substantial acknowledgement of his loss. What makes Lancelotti's death even more tragic is the fact that, despite his obvious talent, his career was still in its upward trajectory. He had the energy and passion that could have pushed him further into the spotlight, but the darkness he faced offstage cut his life short. His sudden passing is a reminder of the fragile line between success and tragedy, especially in a time when stars often battled personal demons. Ricky Lancelotti's death remains a quiet, eerie chapter in the history of music, a young, talented artist who left the world far too soon, leaving behind the haunting question of what might have been. Anna Jantar. Anna Jantar was one of Poland's most beloved pop stars, known for her striking voice and captivating performances. Born in 1950, she quickly rose to fame in the 1970s with a series of hit songs that blended pop, folk, and traditional Polish music. Her songs, such as Tyle Slonka w Kalamiesi and Najtrudniejszy Pierwszy Krok, resonated deeply with the Polish public, earning her a devoted following. Anna Jantar was poised to become an international star, with her musical career flourishing both in Poland and abroad. However, her promising future was tragically and abruptly cut short. On April 14, 1980, at just 29 years old, Anna Jantar died in a plane crash near Warsaw. She was aboard the Mikołaj Kopernik aircraft, a Polish Airlines plane that tragically crashed during its descent. The crash, caused by a combination of technical issues and poor weather conditions, killed all passengers on board, including Jantar. Her untimely death shocked Poland, leaving fans devastated and questioning how someone so young and talented could be taken so suddenly. What makes her death especially tragic and bizarre is the quiet manner in which it unfolded. At the time of the crash, Jantar had just completed a successful tour and was on her way back to Warsaw after a performance. Her career was on the rise, and the future seemed incredibly bright. Yet she was gone in an instant, her life and promising career extinguished by a freak accident. There was no major media frenzy following her death, only a deep and quiet mourning from those who admired her work. Anna Jantar's passing remains a haunting reminder of how fragile life can be, especially for someone with so much potential, and how a quiet tragedy can erase a bright star from the music world. Tommy Caldwell. Tommy Caldwell, the talented bassist and founding member of the Marshall Tucker Band, was a key figure in Southern rock, known for his deep grooves and exceptional musicality. With his distinctive sound, Caldwell helped shape the band's success, contributing to hits like Can't You See and Heard It in a Love Song. The Marshall Tucker Band became synonymous with the Southern rock genre, blending rock, jazz, blues, and country influences into something uniquely their own. Caldwell's bass lines were integral to the band's signature sound, earning him respect within the industry and from fans alike. However, on April 28, 1980, at just 30 years old, Tommy Caldwell's life and career were tragically cut short. He died in a car accident in South Carolina when his vehicle collided with another while Caldwell was on his way to a show. The crash left him with fatal injuries, and despite efforts to save him, he passed away shortly after. Caldwell's death sent shockwaves through the music world, as he was still at the height of his career, full of promise and potential. What makes Caldwell's death so bizarre and tragic is not just the youth and talent lost, but the quiet way it unfolded. The tragedy didn't receive the widespread media attention one might expect for such a significant loss in the world of music. Instead, his passing was marked by a somber, almost silent grief. His bandmates, along with fans, mourned the loss of a musician who had helped define a genre, but his death quickly became another what-could-have-been story in the rock world. Tommy Caldwell's untimely passing is a stark reminder of the fragility of life. His legacy lives on through the music he helped create, but the quiet, bizarre nature of his death leaves an eerie void in the Southern rock scene. The 80s were a decade of iconic music, but for some artists, their untimely and bizarre deaths remain part of their legacies. These stories are a reminder of the darker side of fame and the unpredictability of life. If you found these tales as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. Whose musician's story shocked you the most? And if you want more deep dives into the untold stories behind the music, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode.